8 years after their divorce, Vanessa saw Malcolm standing alone at the back of their school reunion and turned their broken marriage into a joke.
Still fixing refrigerators?
Thermal systems.
The company he founded from that invention
I suppose some dreams survive longer than marriages.
was now valued at more than $3 billion. His ownership stake had made him a billionaire.
Did you pay the bill or buy another compressor?
Money could not erase the overdue bills Vanessa once held in her hands. It could not return the dinners he missed or excuse the promises he broke. Minutes later,
An anonymous alumnus may save this workshop tonight.
she had no idea that the man she had just mocked controlled the decision.
The board needs your answer before dessert.
As Malcolm accepted an access card from his former teacher and walked toward the waiting school board, he faced a choice.
Mr. Reed, we're ready for your decision.
Use his success to humiliate Vanessa, or finally tell the whole truth about why their marriage ended. The first time Vanessa laughed at me. That night, she was holding a microphone beneath a banner that read 20 years together. We had not been together for 8. I stood near the back wall of Ashford Technical High's gym, close enough to recognize the lift of her eyebrow before she delivered a joke. The room smelled of floor polish, catered chicken, and machine oil from the old workshop. Vanessa looked as memory had preserved her, elegant, composed, and able to command a room without raising her voice. "Malcolm Reed," she said, "I was beginning to think you had finally learned not to arrive late." Several classmates turned and offered uncertain smiles. "I came through the workshop," I said. "Evelyn asked me to look at something." Vanessa tilted her head. "Still fixing refrigerators? Thermal systems," I answered. "Of course." Malcolm always knew how to give a small thing an expensive name. The laughter was not thunderous. Real humiliation rarely sounds the way it does in the movies. It was a few chuckles, a glass set down too quickly, someone whispering my name to a spouse. Vanessa continued, "Back when we were married, he was going to change the world with one metal box in our garage. I suppose some dreams survive longer than marriages." For half a second, I was 35 again. Vanessa was holding an overdue electric notice and asking whether I had paid the bill or ordered another compressor. I told her the prototype was almost ready. It had been almost ready for 3 years. Across the gym, Evelyn Grant stopped arranging auction sheets and looked at me. She had taught us to read wiring diagrams, but her expression needed no interpretation. "Do not disappear inside yourself again." One sentence could have corrected Vanessa. I could have told everyone what Everstead Thermal had become or what my shares were worth. But money would not change what those overdue notices had felt like in her hands. So I buttoned my jacket and said, "It was good to see you too, Vanessa." Her smile faltered. The reunion moved on. Old photographs appeared on a screen. Teenagers leaning over engines, circuit boards, and machines the school could no longer afford to replace. I recognized the workshop. It was where Evelyn had once handed me a damaged cooling valve and told me not to guess. Measure it. Listen to it. Understand what changed before it failed. That lesson had eventually made me rich. It had not made me a good husband soon enough. The lights dimmed for a presentation called Save Our Workshop. Vanessa described broken ventilation, obsolete tools, and a technical program that might close next year. Her voice softened when she spoke about the students. Whatever had happened between us, she cared about that room. Then, a rendering of the proposed laboratory appeared behind her. Bearing the silver emblem of Everstead Thermal, people leaned forward. Vanessa explained that an anonymous alumnus connected to the company was considering the largest education grant in the school's history. The decision would be announced that evening. She did not look at me once. Evelyn crossed the gym after the applause. "You could have told her," she said. "Tonight isn't supposed to be about me." "No," Evelyn replied. "But silence has cost you before. She pressed an access card into my palm and nodded toward the workshop doors. "The board is waiting, Malcolm. They need your final answer before dessert." The access card felt cold in my palm. 8 years earlier, Vanessa had placed another piece of plastic on our kitchen table, a credit card statement folded around a receipt for a compressor I had promised not to buy. My dream had not begun as an enemy of our marriage. When we bought our narrow 2-bedroom house, I worked maintenance at a regional food warehouse. Every summer, refrigeration destroyed thousands of dollars in produce before technicians could restore the system. Small grocers suffered even more. They could not afford industrial backup equipment, so one failed compressor could erase a month's profit. I believed I could build a compact thermal unit that kept cold rooms stable during outages without requiring a diesel generator. Vanessa believed it too. She helped me clear the garage. She created our first budget and labeled every expense in a spreadsheet. When my earliest prototype held its temperature for 43 minutes, she danced barefoot between the workbench and our washing machine. 43 minutes, she said. Next time, give me an hour. Back then, we were building it together. The problem was that every improvement exposed another weakness. A valve cracked under pressure. Insulation trapped moisture. A supplier changed its prices after I had already calculated production costs. 43 minutes became 57. 57 became 2 hours. But the reliable, affordable system I had promised remained just beyond reach. I stopped coming inside for dinner. At first, Vanessa left a plate in the oven. Later, she left it on the counter. Eventually, she stopped cooking enough for 2. She never demanded that I abandon the invention. She asked for limits. No more equipment on credit. 2 evenings together each week. 1 full weekend every month without the garage light burning past midnight. I agreed to every condition. Then I broke them one at a time. The compressor on that statement cost $1,200. I had found it at an auction and convinced myself the opportunity was too good to lose. I planned to replace the money before Vanessa noticed. That was how I justified most of my mistakes then. If the ending was successful, I believed the method would be forgiven. Vanessa sat across from me at the kitchen table. "Did you buy this? I can explain." I didn't ask whether you could explain it. The new chamber can hold temperature twice as long. If the test works, I can finally show it to investors. And if it doesn't, I looked toward the garage. She followed my eyes and gave a tired laugh. That room gets more honest answers than I do. I wanted to tell her that I was doing it for us, that one successful demonstration could pay every bill and restore everything we had postponed. Instead, I accused her of giving up when I was close. Vanessa did not shout. She opened the drawer beside her and removed a folder. Inside were bank's statements, unpaid notices, and the name of a marriage counselor she had called 3 weeks earlier. "I'm not asking you to stop dreaming," she said. "I'm asking you to notice what your dream is costing." I refused counseling because the appointment overlapped with a supplier meeting. The supplier canceled. The counselor did not offer Vanessa another evening appointment for 6 weeks. By then, she had begun sleeping in the spare room. Our final argument did not happen beside the prototype. It happened on the front steps after I missed dinner with her mother. Vanessa had waited at the restaurant for nearly an hour while I repeated a pressure test that could have been performed the next morning. "You keep saying this is for our future," she told me, "but you are never present in our life." No answer, so I reached for the cruelest defense available. "You'll regret leaving when this works." Her face changed, not with anger but with recognition. She understood that I had turned our marriage into a wager. If I succeeded, I expected to be declared right. If I failed, she would be blamed for not believing hard enough. Vanessa moved out 2 weeks later. When the divorce papers arrived, my prototype was still sitting in the garage beneath a blue tarp. It had consumed our savings, our weekends, and most of the patience she once gave freely. Years later, people would describe Vanessa as the woman who left before I became successful. That version made a better headline. It was not the truth. She had stayed through every early failure. What she finally left was not an unsuccessful inventor. She left a husband who had stopped showing up. For the first 6 months after Vanessa left, I worked harder. That was my answer to everything then. I believed the fastest way to repair my life was to make the prototype succeed. I imagined Vanessa hearing my name on the radio or seeing my equipment installed across the country. In that fantasy, success would become an argument she could no longer win. Instead, the next pressure test failed. A seal ruptured while I was standing alone in the garage. Cold vapor filled the chamber, the emergency valve opened, and the machine shut itself down exactly as it was designed to do. No explosion. No dramatic disaster. Just another failed test and a silence large enough for me to hear what my life had become. The divorce required us to sell the house. Vanessa received her share of the remaining equity, and I moved into a one-bedroom apartment above a closed furniture store. The prototype went into a rented storage unit because the apartment manager would not allow industrial equipment inside. I returned to warehouse maintenance full-time. For the first time in years, I stopped trying to convince anyone that I was close. I repaired loading bay motors, replaced worn belts, and listened to the people who actually depended on cooling equipment every day. They did not care about my elegant design. They cared whether a unit could be repaired at 2 in the morning with standard tools. They cared whether a new employee could understand the warning lights. They cared whether replacement parts could be purchased locally instead of shipped from another state. My prototype had been designed to impress investors. It had not been designed for the people who would use it. That realization hurt more than the divorce papers because it exposed the same failure in both parts of my life. I had been so determined to prove that my idea worked that I stopped listening to the people it was supposed to serve. I began again, not with a new invention, but with a notebook full of complaints from technicians, grocers, warehouse operators, and clinic managers. I rebuilt the control panel. I reduced the number of specialized parts. I added a manual bypass that could be operated without software. Most importantly, I asked other people to challenge my decisions. A former warehouse electrician helped redesign the safety circuit. 2 technicians tested every component and received ownership shares, instead of promises about future bonuses. An operations manager controlled spending because I no longer trusted ambition to regulate itself. We called the company Everstead Thermal. Our first customer was a neighborhood medical clinic that needed backup cooling for temperature-sensitive supplies. The clinic could not afford a generator large enough to support its entire building, so we installed one compact unit in its storage room. 3 weeks later, a storm interrupted power across Ashford Harbor. The lights failed shortly after midnight. Our system held the storage room within its required temperature range until morning. Nothing was lost. The clinic director told a regional distributor. The distributor ordered 4 units. A grocery cooperative ordered 9 more. Within 18 months, we moved from a borrowed workshop into a former textile warehouse. Growth did not arrive as one miraculous moment. It came through service calls, revised manuals, failed components, honest reports, and customers who recommended us because the equipment did what we promised. By the 5th year, Everstead systems were operating in food warehouses, rural clinics, and emergency storage facilities across 3 countries. By the 7th, an investment group valued the company at more than $3 billion. My ownership stake was worth just over $1 billion. The number felt unreal. It existed mostly in company shares, legal documents, and financial reports. My apartment became a quiet house. My old car became a newer one, but I never developed a taste for public attention. Reporters knew the company better than they knew me. I told myself I valued privacy. Part of that was true. The other part was that I did not know how to speak about success without imagining Vanessa, hearing it as the final sentence of our old argument. I had become what I once promised. That did not mean she had been wrong to leave. 3 months before the reunion, Evelyn called me from the old workshop. Enrollment was rising, but the school planned to close the program because its ventilation, electrical panels, and equipment no longer met modern requirements. "I don't want your name on a wall," she said. "I want you to come and see what these students can do." I agreed to fund the assessment anonymously. I also agreed to attend the reunion, although I nearly canceled twice. Now, standing outside the workshop with Evelyn's access card in my hand, I understood why she had insisted I come personally. She had not invited me merely to save a room. She wanted to know whether I had finally learned how to enter one without needing to prove I was the most important person inside. The workshop doors opened with the same heavy scrape I remembered from school. Inside, the room had changed less than the gym. The workbenches were scarred, the ventilation ducts rattled, and one ceiling light flickered above a row of machines old enough to have taught 2 generations of students. The school principal waited beside 3 board members, a facilities engineer, and 4 nervous seniors wearing safety glasses. Nobody treated me like a billionaire. That was a good beginning. A student named Luis showed me their project. A portable cooling cabinet intended for community shelters during power failures. The casing was rough, but the design was thoughtful. They had recovered parts from discarded laboratory equipment and built the control system themselves. "How long does it hold temperature?" I asked. 6 hours without power," Luis said. "We're trying to reach 8. And what fails first?" He hesitated. Most people presenting an invention want to describe what works. Technicians learn to ask what breaks. "The compressor overheats," another student admitted. But only during the longer test. They powered on the cabinet. At first, the motor settled into a steady vibration. Then I heard a thin metallic pulse beneath it. The sound was quiet enough that the board members continued talking. I reached for the cutoff switch. The compressor stopped. Louis looked alarmed. "Did we damage it?" "Not yet." I crouched beside the cabinet and asked them to remove the rear panel. The temperature sensor had been mounted near the return air opening, where it was reading cooled air before that air circulated through the full chamber. The controller believed the cabinet was warmer than it really was, forcing the compressor to continue working after it should have rested. The machine was not failing because the students lacked ability. It was failing because the information reaching the controller was incomplete. "Move the sensor here," I said, pointing toward the center channel. "Then run the test again. Don't ask the system what is happening in the easiest place to measure. Ask what is happening where the load is greatest." Louis nodded while another student marked the new position. Behind me, the workshop doors opened. Vanessa entered with 2 reunion committee members. She stopped when she saw me kneeling beside the cabinet. "I'm sorry," she told the principal. "I didn't realize the inspection had started." Then she looked at me. "Malcolm, the board needs the company representative before we can continue." The principal glanced at Evelyn. Evelyn said nothing. I stood and wiped a streak of dust from my fingers. "The ventilation proposal is workable," I told the board. "But the electrical panel needs complete replacement. Retrofitting it would save money now and create a larger safety problem later." The facilities engineer nodded. That was Mr. Reed's conclusion during the preliminary review, too. Vanessa's attention shifted from him to me. Mr. Reed? The principal stepped forward. Vanessa, Malcolm is the company representative. One of the committee members gave a quiet laugh, apparently believing it was another reunion joke. The principal did not smile. He found it Everstead thermal. For several seconds, Vanessa did not speak. Her eyes moved from my face to the silver company emblem printed on the inspection folders. I could almost see her rearranging everything she had said in the gym. "You founded it?" she asked. "Yes." "The Everstead thermal?" "There's only one that I know of." Evelyn gave me a warning look, and I realized the answers had carried more satisfaction than I intended. Vanessa recovered quickly. She had always been good at functioning while hurt. "We should return to the gym," she said. "The announcement is scheduled in 5 minutes." On the way back, word traveled faster than we did. By the time I entered the gym, conversations had divided into whispers. Phones appeared beneath tables. People who had barely remembered me 20 minutes earlier suddenly remembered sitting beside me in chemistry class. Daniel met me near the aisle. "Your company is worth more than $3 billion. That's what the last report said. He stared at me. "Vanessa has no idea, does she?" "She does now." At the front of the room, the principal took the microphone. He explained that the company considering the workshop grant had been founded by an Ashford graduate. He spoke Everstead's cooling systems, its apprenticeship programs, and its expansion into international markets. Then he said my name. Applause rose across the gym. I walked toward the front without looking at Vanessa. She stood beside the podium with both hands resting against its edge, her face composed except for the color rising along her cheeks. The principals introduced me as Everstead's founder and majority owner. Someone near the front whispered the word billionaire, loudly enough for 3 tables to hear. I accepted the microphone. The easiest thing would have been to repeat Vanessa's joke and let the room laugh in the opposite direction. Instead, I told them about the student cooling cabinet. I explained that 4 teenagers working with salvaged parts had built something useful enough to deserve serious investment. The applause changed. It moved away from me and toward the students standing near the workshop doors. Vanessa finally looked at me. There was embarrassment in her expression. But there was also a question. Was I going to punish her in front of everyone? I looked around the gym, then back at the woman who had once helped clear a place for my first machine in our garage. Before I announced my decision about the grant, I said, "I need to correct something that was said about our marriage tonight." Vanessa's fingers tightened against the podium. Around the gym, people adjusted in their chairs. Some expected me to defend myself. Others expected the kind of revenge that becomes a favorite story at every reunion afterward. I understood the temptation. For 8 years, I had imagined what it might feel like to stand in front of someone who remembered me at my lowest point and reveal that I had become more successful than either of us believed possible. Now that the moment had arrived, it felt smaller than I expected. "Vanessa told you that I wanted to change the world with a beta box in our garage," I said. "That part is true." A few people laughed cautiously. She was the first person who believed the box could work. She built our early budgets, found suppliers, and stayed awake through tests that failed before midnight and tests that failed 5 minutes before sunrise. Vanessa looked down. When progress slows, I stopped treating our marriage like a partnership. I spent money we had agreed not to spend. I missed family dinners and refused counseling because I decided every appointment was less important than my next test. The gym no longer felt like an audience waiting for entertainment. It felt like a collection of people remembering their own unfinished arguments. Vanessa should not have made its private history into a joke tonight, I continued. But it would be dishonest for me to use my success to pretend she was wrong about everything. Her eyes lifted toward mine. She did not leave because the invention failed. She left because I had become unreliable. Eversted's success does not travel backward through time and pay an overdue bill. It does not return a missed anniversary or make an empty chair less empty. Near the workshop doors, Evelyn folded her arms and gave a small nod. I could have stopped there, but honesty that only protects the speaker is another form of performance. "What Vanessa said hurt me," I said, "and I will not pretend it didn't. But the truth is large enough to hold what she did tonight and what I did 8 years ago. Nobody applauded. I was grateful. Applause would have turned the confession into another victory. I shifted my attention toward the students gathered near the doors. "The first machine I built in this school was terrible," I said. "It leaked, overheated, and made a noise that caused Evelyn Grant to disconnect it before I embarrassed the entire engineering department." That earned a genuine laugh, including one from Evelyn. But this workshop taught me how to fail without hiding the measurements. It taught me that a useful machine is not the one with the most impressive design. It is the one people can understand, repair, and trust. I opened the grant folder the principal had placed on the podium. Eversted Thermal will fund the complete electrical and ventilation replacement, new fabrication equipment, and the restoration of the cooling laboratory. A breath passed through the room. The initial commitment is $6 million over 5 years. It also includes 12 paid apprenticeships each year, with places reserved for students who cannot afford unpaid training. This time, several students reacted before the adults did. Luis covered his mouth. Another student grabbed his shoulder. The grant will be supervised by an independent committee that includes instructors, students, alumni, and local technicians. Annual spending reports will be public. If the program stops serving students, Eversted's name will not protect it from review. The principal looked surprised. The board had seen the financial amount, but not the final conditions. "One more thing," I said. "The workshop will not be named after me." Someone near the front called out, "Why not? Because students should not have to walk beneath a billionaire's name to use tools their community helped purchase." I looked back at the old photographs projected on the screen. Keep Evelyn Grant's name on the teaching laboratory. She earned that space one student at a time. Evelyn removed her glasses and looked toward the floor. The applause began with the students. It spread gradually, not as a reaction to my wealth, but to the fact that their program would still exist next year. I returned the microphone to the principal. People stood to approach me, but Evelyn stepped into the aisle and held them back long enough for the students to reach me first. They asked about apprenticeships, equipment, and whether their cooling cabinet could be tested at an Eversted facility. Those were questions I knew how to answer. When the crowd finally thinned, Vanessa was no longer beside the podium. I found her near the hallway leading to the workshop. Her reunion badge had been removed and she held it loosely between her fingers. "I'm sorry," she said. "I waited." She glanced toward the gym, where people were still celebrating the grant. "I know that isn't enough." "No," I said. "It isn't." She accepted the answer without defending herself. "Will you give me 5 minutes?" she asked. "Not here, in the old workshop." 8 years earlier, I would have followed her because I wanted forgiveness. That night I followed because I was finally prepared to hear something I might not like. The workshop was quieter without the students. A ventilation fan turned somewhere above us, clicking once during every rotation. Vanessa stopped beside the workbench where Luis and his classmates had left their cooling cabinet open. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she placed her reunion badge on the bench. "I knew you were doing well," she said. I didn't know what well meant. That doesn't change what happened. No. It makes what I did more embarrassing, but not more wrong. She faced me fully. People started asking about you while we were setting up the reunion. I told them you were probably still building that machine. Everyone remembered the garage, the debt, and the divorce. It became an easy story. An easy story for whom? For me. The answer came without hesitation. Vanessa rested one hand against the workbench. For years, I told myself I had left a man chasing something impossible. That version made every decision simple. You were reckless, the invention was hopeless, and I was the responsible person who finally accepted reality. You were the responsible person. I was responsible when I left. I wasn't responsible tonight. The fan clicked above us again. When I saw you standing in the gym, she continued, I felt like I was back in our kitchen. I remembered every bill and every night I ate alone. I wanted everyone else to remember that version of you before you had the chance to tell them something different. So you made me the joke first. Yes. There was no explanation hidden behind the answer, no attempt to blame the microphone, the wine, or the people who laughed. I am sorry, Malcolm, not because you turned out to be rich. I would owe you the same apology if you still repaired warehouse refrigerators. That mattered more than I wanted it to. Vanessa looked toward the half-built cooling cabinet. When the principal said you founded Everstead, I thought the worst part would be looking foolish in front of everyone. It wasn't. What was? Realizing I had needed you to fail. I said nothing. If the company failed, then leaving you felt like the only possible decision. But if it succeeded, I had to wonder whether I walked away just before everything changed. You didn't. She looked at me. You did not leave too early, I said. You left after giving me more chances than I knew how to recognize. The fact that the machine eventually worked does not mean you were supposed to keep living the way we were living. Her shoulders lowered, slightly, as though she had been carrying that question longer than either of us understood. I wanted you to tell me that 8 years ago, she said. 8 years ago, I wanted you to regret leaving. The truth sounded uglier aloud. I imagined calling you after the clinic ordered our first unit. Then after our first profitable year. Then after the investment report. But every conversation I rehearsed ended with you admitting I had been right. Were you? About the machine, yes. And about us? No. Vanessa looked down at her hands. I didn't need the machine to fail, she said. I needed to know I had mattered before it succeeded. You mattered, I know that now. No, I said. You mattered then. I behaved as if you didn't. Her eyes filled, but she did not cry. Vanessa had never used tears to finish a conversation for her. I am not asking to come back into your life, she said. I know an apology doesn't buy access. I'm glad you understand that. I do. She picked up her reunion badge but did not pin it back onto her dress. I'll resign from the grant committee tomorrow. After tonight, people may question whether I can treat your involvement fairly. That would be appropriate. The words were firm, but she accepted them. If an independent committee later believes my financial experience is useful, I'll help, she said. No special position, no private arrangement. That would be their decision. She nodded. Can you forgive me? I considered giving her the answer that would make the moment easier. For most of our marriage, easy promises had caused enough damage. I can leave tonight without trying to hurt you back, I said. I can believe your apology is sincere. Forgiveness may take longer. That's fair. We stood beside the student's machine. Two people who had once loved each other and then spent years protecting different versions of the same ending. Nothing romantic returned. Something more useful did. The truth no longer belonged to whichever one of us told the story first. Vanessa opened the workshop door. The noise of the reunion entered again. Haha, dishes, chairs moving across the gym floor. You should go first, she said. "They're waiting for you." I shook my head. "They're waiting for the grant. That isn't the same thing." She gave a small, tired smile. This time, neither of us used the other as a punchline. We returned to the gym separately. 6 months later, the workshop reopened on a cold Monday morning. There was no reunion banner in the gym and no catered dinner. Students arrived carrying backpacks, safety glasses, and half-finished projects. Electricians were still labeling the final panel when Evelyn unlocked the doors. The old room had not been erased. The workbenches were restored rather than replaced. Scratches left by generations of students remained visible beneath the new protective finish. The ventilation no longer rattled. Every emergency switch worked, and the equipment could be repaired with components the school could obtain locally. Evelyn had insisted on that last condition. A school should not need a billionaire every time a machine breaks. She told our engineers. She was right. The grant committee included 2 instructors, 2 students, a local technician, 3 alumni, and 1 representative from Everstead. Every expense required public documentation. The apprenticeship positions paid enough that students would not have to choose between training and an evening job. Vanessa resigned from the original reunion committee the morning after our conversation. 3 months later, the independent board invited her to review its financial controls. The invitation came after a recorded vote, without my participation. She accepted a temporary advisory role and created a reporting system that allowed families to see how every part of the grant was being used. We spoke only when the work required it. Our emails were polite. Our meetings had agendas. Neither of us used the project as an excuse to re-enter the other's private life. That boundary made cooperation possible. On opening morning, Luis and his team rolled their completed cooling cabinet into the center of the laboratory. Moving the temperature sensors had prevented the compressor from overheating. But they had made other improvements too. The cabinet now maintained its target temperature for 8 hours and 12 minutes without external power. Luis handed me the testing report. "We failed the 7-hour test twice," he said. "What did you learn?" "That the door seal was too stiff when the room got cold." "And what did you change?" "The material, not the data." Evelyn heard him and Sawson smiled. He had learned the lesson. The ceremony lasted 11 minutes. The principal thanked the contractors, instructors, alumni, and students. Evelyn's name remained on the teaching laboratory, though she complained that the letters were too large. My name appeared nowhere on the walls. I preferred it that way. Afterward, a first-year student stood near one of the new fabrication tables, struggling with the straps of a protective apron. She had arrived alone and had not spoken to anyone since entering the room. Vanessa noticed her first. She crossed the workshop and showed the student how to loosen the upper strap before fastening the waist. When the buckle caught, I held the loose end while Vanessa adjusted it. For a few seconds, the 3 of us concentrated on that small task. No speeches, no photographers, just an apron that needed to fit before a student could begin working safely. "There," Vanessa said. "Try moving your arms." The student lifted them, smiled, and joined her classmates. Vanessa and I remained beside the table. "You look different in here," she said. I spent more time in workshops than boardrooms. I meant different from 8 years ago. I understood. "So do you?" She nodded toward the students. This was worth coming back for. Yes, there were a dozen things we might have said after that. Questions about our separate lives. Memories softened by time. Speculation about what might have happened if success had arrived earlier. We left those questions alone. Vanessa returned to the committee table. I joined Luis near the cooling cabinet. We did not walk away angry, and we did not walk away together. That was our ending. Not a restored marriage. Not a billionaire proving that everyone else had been wrong. not an apology powerful enough to erase A's. We had simply stopped using the past as it against each other. I once believed success would settle every argument. I thought wealth would transform sacrifice into wisdom and make every person who doubted me regret it. But money only proved that the machine worked. It could not prove that I had loved well while building it. Vanessa's apology did not change why our marriage ended. My confession did not erase what she did at the reunion. What changed was that neither of us needed a false version anymore. The workshop filled with the sounds of students beginning their first projects. Tools touching metal, cabinet doors closing, instructors repeating safety instructions, and questions asked before mistakes became expensive. Evelyn stood in the doorway, listening. I wondered whether she had invited me back because the school needed my money, or because she knew I still needed one final lesson from that room. A useful system does not hide its failures. Neither should a useful life, if stories about ambition, accountability, and dignity without easy revenge stay with you. Subscribe to Hush Stories. There are more quiet truths waiting to be heard.